Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Moondrop Kadenz or Cadence, which is another IM from Moondrop. And honestly speaking, guys, I don't keep up with Moondrop IMs. Neither have I reviewed any Moondrop IMs overall in my review career, if I can call this a career. And all that to say, guys, I mean, I have no personal stake whatsoever, literally or of course metaphorically, in Moondrops. Everything that follows is my honest opinion, except that I do want to give a shout out to Apos Audio who and Rosemary who sent me this IM, and a big shout out to Rosemary for hooking me up with this, because had it not been for this IM, I might never have realized how much value there is at the base of the pyramid or at the bottom of the pyramid. And by that I of course mean the fact that this is not a very expensive IM. This is a $200 IM, and I don't usually review IMs at this price point. If you look at my roster of work, I tend to focus on more flagship Summit 5 things that I, at this stage of my life and my hobby, would prefer to buy. So this is a bit of a departure from that. And it's not a very sad departure. It's actually a very welcome departure, because I really enjoy this IM. I really enjoy this IM, and honestly, guys, if you had blindfolded me and made me listen to this, I would have ventured to guess that this would possibly be $1,000 IM, because this IM, interestingly, although it's a $200 IM, it scales a lot. So it does and did scale enormously on my Sony WM1ZM2, which is a $3,600 DAP, and it's a bit nonsensical to drive a $200 IM with something that's 18 times more expensive. And no one should do that. However, I have this DAP, so I did try this. And of course, I tried cheaper sources. I did try the Ibasso DX260, which is around $1,000 DAP. Again, a bit of overkill for this. And then I tried the Theo BTR7, which is of course a far cheaper dongle, and perhaps the sort of price point most people will, of sources that most people drive the Kadenz with. And even on this dongle, it was amazing. And it's a bit of a departure, not just for me, but also for Moondrop in terms of how they've tuned it. So we'll talk about all that, guys. And they also have provided the frequency response. We'll talk about that and a lot of other specs. So let's just first talk through what this unboxing contains, since that seems to matter to a lot of people, especially those that are price sensitive. And of course, I think it matters to most people who invest any money in anything to see what ROI or what bang for the buck they get. I'm not someone who's really into unboxings, right? Because I tend to not even look at what's inside the box, as long as I have some of the basics, like the transducer, the cable, and maybe some, if there are tuning devices, then of course I will take a look at the tuning devices, which this has, incidentally. So anyway, so you have a bunch of this paperwork, and you have this carrying pouch, which I think is fairly nifty. It's a pretty standard carrying pouch. It's not going to take up too much space. If you're wearing something very fitted, this might stick out in ways that might not be very aesthetic. But if you're wearing something baggier, then this could well be something that you put in your pocket. And of course, it's mostly made to, protect your IM, so you can throw them into your backpack or what have you. You get two sets of pigtails, and they're interesting because the default termination of the cable that the Kadenz comes with is a 4.4. But you can use this and convert this into a 3.5, which I find very handy. Most sources nowadays have a 4.4 IM or headphone output, so there is no need to have a 3.5 as default. A lot of us do want a 4.4. That seems to be pretty much what every reviewer talks about. So I do think that having a 4.4 as stock was a great idea. Having this pigtail as an extension is, an even better idea. And then you have this pigtail, which is essentially a Type-C dongle DAC. There's a DAC built inside of this, and it sounds fairly decent. Although I would suggest that if it's possible, you invest in a better source. But what's really impressive about Moondrop now is that they let you, for $200, to give you the full solution for this IM, so you're able to drive this off anything, especially your phone. Okay, so guys, this is another box, and then you also have another box here. So very, very quickly, guys, I recently injured my fingers. I don't want to open all these boxes. It's not going to be very forgiving towards my injury. But you should know that this IEM has interestingly shaped nozzles, which enable it to, which actually don't enable it to work with a variety of tips. So the tips that I really enjoyed with this, both in terms of comfort and in terms of fit, and also in terms of sound. By the way, this sounds amazing. This IEM, like I said, for the price, and this will work across a variety of tips. However, what happens is that the nozzle width is pretty meaty. It's pretty thick. It's pretty substantial. If I can show you the nozzle width, this is the nozzle width, and it is pretty substantial and pretty thick, right? And given this kind of nozzle design, it doesn't take a lot of tips. So the two tips that I really liked with it are the pretty standard final type E tips, which I think a lot of you will have. But these are not the final type E tips. These are the Elatech Baroque tips, which are supremely comfortable. So that's it for tips, but basically the larger point is you can swap out these nozzles if in case it causes fit issues, which it might with some of you. And you can swap out this nozzle for other nozzles of different sizes, which can then vary in terms of their insertion depth, which can in turn then vary in terms of the comfort. And so you're able to then tune the fit and the finish, which is a welcome move. So you get two sets of nozzles here. You get two sets of tips here. The regular silicone tips from Moondrop and the more premium Moondrop spring tips, I think they're called. So you get two sets, small, medium, and large, for both the regular silicone and for the spring tips. So that's it for accessorization. The cable itself, it looks very premium. I like the look of this cable. I think it has a bit of memory, but this memory is nothing that I think I'm not used to, even from more high-end cables. It does uncoil pretty easily. The cable looks beautiful. It feels premium, and yeah, I really like the look of this cable. You don't feel like you're buying a $200 IEM when you see a cable like this. But your mileage may vary. Some of you like thinner and lighter cables. If that's the deal, you can of course swap it out. But I really like the look of this cable, and I think it reminds me a lot of the more luxurious segment of cables. The shell design is faceted. It's pretty. It catches light, and it looks premium. It's a bit heavy, and because of this unique shell design, the weight, I think a lot of you will gravitate towards tips that provide a deeper insertion, which will allow this to stay inside your ears. And for that, I really recommend the Elatech Baroque tips, which again is coming from someone who reviews expensive products. Maybe that's not the very most practical review or most practical suggestion. In that case, guys, do use the final type E tips. They both sound great. Okay, to talk about the specs, this is roughly so like I said, I mean the pins, these are 2-pin cables, 4.4 mm termination. I'm sorry, my throat is getting a bit dry because I'm doing this first thing in the morning. The sensitivity is 122 decibels, and the impedance is 35 ohms, which is pretty standard for headphones and slightly higher for IEMs, I suppose. But it's sensitive, so you can drive it off anything, and there's no issue of hiss or whatever from any source. Now, in terms of the frequency response graph, although this will look pretty standard, I think overall what this sounds like to me is that it doesn't have as much elevation in the bass that a lot of Harman-tuned Moondrop IEMs do, which I'm really enjoying because it still has bass energy to sound punchy and impactful. And mind you, if you watch my reviews, I am one of those audiophile bass heads, so bass punch is of paramount importance to me and non-negotiable for me. So this does deliver on that front. It is a 10 mm dynamic driver, and it sounds cohesive and bassy. However, because it's not Harman tuned, you don't have that somewhat of a subdued, you don't have that riser on the mid bass. I'm sorry, let me take that back. You don't have the mound of sub bass and that sort of absence of mid bass, which Harman tuned IMs invariably tend to have. Most Harman tuned products favor sub bass over mid bass so ostensibly and perceptibly that it can sound a bit dry in the mids and in the bass and sound very one note in the bass. So this is not an IM that has that issue because because it has a flatter bass reproduction, you almost feel that there's more balance. And there is a bit more mid-bass energy, as might be evident. So it does involve and incorporate mid-bass in the presentation in such a tasteful way that it sounds more balanced from sub to mid, more nuanced, a little warmer, and richer. Overall, it's a richer sounding set because of the way the bass is balanced, yet it's impactful down low. It's balanced, it's textured, and honestly, it's very resolving, especially if you drive it off more expensive sources. Moving on to upper mids. The upper mids here are pretty standard, except somehow these don't sound as shouty to me as a lot of Harman tuned IMs, and I don't have the Harman graph here, but I would venture a guess that the upper mid peak is perhaps a little restrained compared to what Harman gives you. So I do think that these upper mids are tuned to where my preferences lie with regard to upper mids, which is to have presence but not shoutiness, and that really works out here. As a matter of fact, on the Sony DAP, the W1ZM2, which is an insanely expensive DAP, and no one should be buying this DAP for this IM, I just happen to have this, I get some upper mid stage. I mean, I don't want to call it upper mid stage. I get some staging because the entire presentation is just pushed back a little bit, which I really like. And I haven't really ever experienced IMs at this price point, which give me this sense of staging. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the staging is being imparted, whether it's some upper mids dip trick. It's not coming through in the graph, but it does sound a bit, never recessed by the way, but just enough stagey to sound realistic, and it's beautiful. It doesn't sacrifice intimacy, but has a stage effect front to back. I'm not sure if it's an upper mids trick, but I just thought I would mention in the upper mids category of this discussion. And treble finally is very, very lucid, very, very articulate, but never bright. I wouldn't say it's a rolled off treble, although it might look like the treble has rolled off here, because this is more akin to Harman, I think, the treble, but then you also get a slight, ever so slight bump around the 10 kilohertz range, which has the effect of giving it a sense of space. So it's a damn well tuned IM. It's an amazingly tuned IM, and I love this IM for its tuning. And honestly, guys, if I knew this sounded like this, I might have just gone on and bought it for my consumption, because I'm listening to it nowadays off my Sony, which is ridiculous. But I'm liking it off my Sony, hence I'm listening to it off my Sony. But it does work with every other source I have, and it works exceedingly well with every other source I have. Okay, for technical performance, guys, this is very resolving. And I think if, again, you blindfolded me and asked me how resolving this was, I would say this is as resolving as a $1,000 IM. Because resolution is one of those things that you keep eking out more and more as you go up the price. Not always. Resolution doesn't make big jumps. If you go from 200 to 2000, it's the one aspect of a performance of an IM that doesn't have to make a huge jump. And this is where Moondrop really shines, because their IMs tend to be quite resolving for little money. So this is one of those. It's resolving, and I did not miss my flagship A-tier Summit for IMs when I was listening to this. Soundstage, a lot of people haven't really remarked on, but I do think this has pretty wide soundstage. Again, the Sony does tend to widen soundstage on everything that I've heard and make it really, really large, but I have a sense of my Sony's capability, and I've driven this off the other cheaper sources here, and the soundstage is decidedly large, especially when you use the right tips. It's a large soundstage, and their sounds I'm getting from, and this images are pretty tall and dispersed, and not in a way that's not cohesive, and maybe dispersed is not the right term, because this presentation is damn cohesive. But it is an IM that is giving me very interestingly distinct images, and I'm able to follow sounds and lower level signals coming from different points on the stage, which is honestly blowing my mind that this is happening with the $200 IM. So for this, I give it mad props, imaging and soundstage. Timbrally, there's nothing really wrong with it. I don't think it's particularly natural sounding. It's not particularly wrong sounding. The tonality does aid to its timbre. It sounds great. And finally, in terms of dynamic slam and punch, which is to say the assessment of how convincing it sounds between the loudest part of a track and the quietest part of a track, whether it's accurately able to portray that spectrum of loudness and quietness. That is what we call macrodynamics, and that leads to perception sometimes of bass slam, especially for kick drums. On that front, it's impressive. Again, I think it's way better than expected. It hits hard. It is a dynamic driver and a high quality dynamic driver, and it hits hard. It sounds convincing, and I love it for that. It is an Ultra Gen 2 10mm patented dynamic driver, is what they say. And the diaphragm is a TAC diamond coated dome composite diaphragm. So if that matters to you guys. So overall, this is a home run, guys. And maybe because Moondrop keeps churning out IEMs every other week, this is not getting its due attention. But frankly, this is the best IEM I've ever heard in this sort of a price class, bar none. Like, I've heard everything. I've heard the Kato, I've heard Tangim IEMs, I've heard Sennheisers, I've heard, in terms of more reputable brands, so to speak. I've heard everything out there, and even a lot of the clinical collaborations, which I do hold in high esteem. But I do think this is a winner for $200, and I wish this was getting more attention because it's amazing. And maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe this is already getting a lot of attention. But this, deserves. This will get my unequivocal recommendation, unambiguous recommendation as a must-buy. And I think the tuning is just awesome. So thank you for watching this, and a big shout out again to APOS Audio. I'll leave a link in my description to APOS Audio's website where you can buy this from. APOS is amazing, and they carry, guys, almost everything that you could want. For the best of the best from China. Great quality DACs, sources, streamers nowadays. Do check out everything that they have. And they have their proprietary tube amps, their tubes, and headphones, and of course IEMs. They have a plethora of IEMs. So that's it, guys. I hope this was useful. If you like this, give this a like. Stay tuned to my next one, to this channel for my next one is basically what I mean to say. Thank you. Bye-bye.